All right, hello. Welcome back to the podcast. Um, this is a podcast where we go over economic or libertarian books. This podcast is for people to read and follow along with us throughout the week. This is just a discussion channel, essentially. And so we do want to chat with you guys, so post questions or commentary throughout the stream if you want to. We're also looking for suggestions of books with the theme being Austrian economics and libertarianism. Other schools of libertarianism could be covered in the future, but we will be doing that after getting the main books of the Austrian school done. So today's topics are broadly controlling of commodities, price controls, and unions. The question, the infamous union question.
So chapters 16 through 19, if you haven't read the title.
Yep.
Yeah, we're only doing 4 this week.
But they're longer chapters, right?
Yeah, they're longer chapters, so it's the same amount of pages that we're doing. We're trying to, apparently we're doing about 35. That seems to be a reasonable amount of pages for us to do each week.
Yeah, I've been really busy lately, so I didn't read anything. I'm just here to help you guys out and run the stream. But hopefully I'll be able to participate more in the future. I'm just really busy this month.
I mean, feel free to throw in anything you have to say, because I'm just an idiot that's learning as I go.
Yep, that's fine.
Yeah, and I'm basically just covering up holes in my education, basically, because I already know a whole bunch about unions, but I have only read a little bit about price controls.
Mm-hmm.
Just because price controls aren't in vogue right now,
Yeah. So, do you want me to go ahead and try to start making sense?
Yep, chapter 16.
Alright, so chapter 16, government price fixing. So when the government tries to fix maximum prices for... Oh wait, hold on. I started too low. Okay, so pricing of commodities above natural market levels would be unfair to consumers, but pricing them below natural market levels would force producers out of business because they cannot turn a profit and make a living, thus decreasing production and creating greater scarcity, resulting in much higher prices than the intended fixed bargain price. So then the government must act to try and stabilize prices.
Yep.
One of the most... Oh, go ahead.
And one of the big fallacies is thinking that you can just institute these price controls when rapid movement in price happens, thinking that the government will just let go of them, and thinking that there is some I don't know, some reason that prices should never move.
Yeah, because value is subjective and it's constantly changing depending on the needs and demands of the consumer.
Yep. So,
and even the producer itself, because the producer also has to consume its raw materials and such to produce stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So on to the next point. One of the most common ways of doing this is giving loans to farmers to keep crops off the market, so speculators won't buy all the crops to hold and sell at a higher price when food becomes scarce again. So, like, say if a farmer had a bunch of corn, and somebody from Walmart wanted to come and buy up all the stocks, they would buy buy it when it was cheap, and then they would hold on to it till prices are high again, and so they can turn a profit. And what the government does is they would give a loan to the farmers, so they would hold on to their crops for later on, so they can sell them when the prices are high again, instead of the speculator taking that risk himself.
Yep.
And let's see. And these loans are given to the farmers to create what is called an ever normal granary, but what that in turn does is make it into an ever political granary, because it will used by politicians to ensure the farmers will continue to vote for them, so they can basically get free money to hold on to their crops, so they can pay their bills and everything, and then still sell their crops at higher prices later on. The effect of the loan is to artificially raise prices above what would naturally be justified in a free market. This leads to a falling off in buyers, as consumers wouldn't be able to spend as much money on other goods and services.
Yeah, I have nothing to add there.
Yeah, because that's kind of going into what we talked about on the last chapters. Loan policies are usually accompanied by policies to restrict production or to increase scarcity by restricting output in order to stabilize prices in favor of the producer by artificially raising them. So basically, the government will decide how much of a good you can actually put out, thus making the price higher, so people will buy them less. I just lost my point.
People will buy them less, and therefore there will probably be less money overall in the economy, right?
Yeah. Because people will not be like buying these goods, the producer won't be making a profit, to which they can invest in more in production.
Right. It basically just cuts production, not necessarily profits.
Right.
Profit margin, I should say.
Okay. And I've read this phrase a lot. Can you explain like what margin in terms of profit margins actually means? I feel like I have an idea, but I don't think I fully grasp that.
So it's basically the percentage of total revenue is profit.
Mm-hmm.
So it'd be total revenue minus cost.
Okay. So like all the profit that you get, what goes into actual bills, and then what's left over.
Yeah. So like let's say you make $100 in revenue. If you have $70 in cost, that's a 30% profit margin.
Okay.
So like when people say that Walmart has a less than a 2% profit margin, what the meaning is all of their sales, only 2 cents on the dollar is in profit.
Okay. That makes sense. That's actually a lot more simple than I was expecting it to be. Okay. So, moving on, assuming controls are imposed on an international scale, world production is caught, and the world's consumers can enjoy less of that product. And then the world is poorer because of it, because consumers, yet again, have less money to spend on other more immediate wants and needs. Restrictionists argue the drop in output would occur anyway in a free market, but the difference is that in a free market, high-cost, inefficient producers are driven out by low-cost, efficient producers. These farmers don't need to lobby for loans and restrictions. The driving out of inefficient farmers by efficient ones allows for them to expand increase their own productivity, so that there may not even be a drop in output, but an increase instead, resulting in a permanently lower price naturally.
Yep. And it's actually kind of funny. What Hazlitt shows is that these speculators, instead of depriving the farmer of goods, actually help stabilize the price of farming goods.
Mm-hmm.
And as such, they actually help subsidize farmer, and because the entrepreneurs that are the speculators, they actually are over optimistic about about the possibility of returns.
Right, and pretty much like all these policies, the intended consequence, what they're intending to do with these policies has the exact opposite effect.
Yeah, it's, when you're talking to a young person, like, a teenager, 16, 17, you can almost understand the naivete, but when you're talking about government intellectuals, it's kind of hard to just assume naivete when they have decades and decades of failure to do what they want it to do.
For sure. Do you have anything else to add to that chapter? Because we went through 16 pretty quick. It was pretty cut and dry.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these are cut and dry chapters, just because of how basic these economic fallacies are. This is an introduction book. It's not it's not a very advanced economics text, but I mean, government price fixing. Do you know how much like the farm subsidies today, the government loans that we give out, and so on and so forth? I mean, it's still happening today. That's the reason why Oklahoma to Iowa is just chock full of corn, is because they have corn subsidies, and they don't try to buy the crop in the subsidization. They just want all of one thing.
Yeah, I know that I forget how much it was, but I know that Trump was trying to give a huge subsidy to farmers, and I'm pretty sure he did.
Oh yeah, no, there's other types of farmers in America, but
for sure,
the big one is corn. It's kind of like when he's talking about unions.
Mm-hmm.
The most politically well-connected will get the most subsidization and these type of loans, and that happens to be corn farmers and such.
Why is it corn farmers that get the most subsidies? I'm not sure like what the huge deal about corn really is.
Corn gives you the most amount of calories per hectare, and hectare is like a area of land, and so it's just if you just wanted to feed people, corn is what you would plant.
Okay.
Wheat is actually one of the least productive in terms of calories per hectare, but it tastes way better than corn. You can make wheat into bread, you can make wheat into noodles and things like that. But if you wanted to feed a nation, you would plant above corn. Well, if you wanted to feed as many people on as little land as possible, you'd plant corn.
I was not aware of that.
Anyways,
he does go into something about wheat in here.
Yeah,
I forget.
This is why farmers in Ireland, when they realized they couldn't sell wheat. There was a bunch of Englishmen that came over to Ireland in the 1500s and 1600s, and when they realized that Ireland's not good for growing wheat, they went back, except for a couple of Scot-Irish. But the reason why they wanted to grow wheat is because you grow wheat to sell to the elites, and then you grow potatoes to eat. That's how it used to work back in those days. And so when they figured out Ireland, because of the nature of the land and the climate there, just wasn't good for growing wheat, they just pieced out, essentially.
Mm. Okay, then. Kyle, do you have anything to say?
Not particularly, except that I know that here in Brazil, we have the same thing, but instead of corn, it's mostly soy, because we are like a huge exporter of soy, and the soy people have a lot of power, a lot of influence.
Yeah, the some of the soy farmers have gotten really hard with the tariffs because they typically export to China. Because you got to remember, China has over 1 billion people, which is over 1/7 of the world's population, but they only have about 2% of its arable land, and arable is farmable. Meanwhile, America produces 27% of the world's food. And so, and the reason why we produce so much food is somewhat to do with the subsidization of corn. So we produce a lot of calories, but that's because we basically put all our eggs in corn. And what was it? A couple years ago, there was, I believe, an apple shortage, and that basically a disease went through North America and wiped out a bunch of apple. And in some places, it was actually apple subsidies instead of corn subsidies. And those places were really hoarding after that. But that's just because when you put all your eggs in one basket, a disease can just come in, wipe out all of that crop, and then your farmers are destitute. Instead of having a diversified farming community, where one guy does apples and another guy does something else that grows up north, so on and so forth. So if a virus comes in, not every single farmer is completely destitute.
Yeah. Right. Since you talked about that, I figure it's mentioned this. I'm not going to go into detail because it's not really on topic 100%, but we could probably talk about this on the other podcast when that starts.
If it ever starts.
Yeah.
Cough.
But the one thing you mentioned, you were talking about China, how they have very little, farming, and despite their huge population. The thing is, China is actually acquiring a lot of land in other countries, and a lot of property, a lot of industry, but a lot of farming land as well. And here Brazil is one of the, as far as I'm concerned at least, one of the primary places that they are buying land in. And this kind of also ties in with, the whole pandemic thing and how the economy is getting worse. All that land is getting cheaper, and they're starting to buy more and more. So, China is they're aware that they have very little farming, and that it's important if they want to be a superpower. So they're already working on that as well.
Yep. Yeah, it's kind of interesting that China's moving into places that have underutilized their natural resources and are just starting to use the natural resources, because they're also doing that in Africa.
Yeah, they're doing that a lot in Africa with, work, because it has a lot of labor there, a lot of people they can just use for cheap labor, a lot of space they can build things in, like factories and whatnot, and also a lot of natural resources.
Yeah, that's natural resources is actually what I was talking about, mainly. Because they've got plenty of people and plenty of cheap labor over in China.
Yeah, but it's just that, Africa is so poor and all of the governments are just mostly super corrupt compared to everything else that they can just, have it their way, basically rule like monarchs. Because they have the money.
And they also don't have a problem putting down peasant revolts, essentially.
Yeah.
How America used to be, 100 years ago? Because, as we discussed, I believe, last week, America used to actually send in the army when people would riot like they did. They have been doing. And they would just send in the army and shut it down violently. Just because, it's ridiculous to allow, the destruction of society just because some people are angry.
Now they're encouraging it. They'll send in the fucking National Guard without magazines in their rifles.
Yeah, that's the most ridiculous thing. The National Guard and army around here is never armed. Like, they'll have fully automatic weapons, but no ammo.
It's such a meme.
Really?
Yeah. Did you not see the pictures of the just the National Guard like in the riot places, and they just have their rifles with no magazines on, like, no magazines in their mag pouches as well.
I have not noticed that.
Just literally
I've seen them, but I haven't noticed.
You should check it out. It's really funny.
That's standard.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, that's standard practice, and I understand you don't want the army to be generally policing, the population if you want a free society. But doing a riot, that's just to be able to protect themselves and so they can't get overrun. You'd want them to have ammo.
Yeah. So, moving on to, unless you have something to say, want to move on to 17?
17, but yes, that's what I was about to say, actually.
Oh, cool. Alright, so government price fixing. When the government tries to fix maximum prices for only a few items, it usually chooses certain basic necessities on the ground that it is most essential that the poor be able to obtain these at a reasonable cost. The argument for holding down the price of goods will be something like, if we leave beef to the mercies of the free market, the price will be pushed up by competitive bidding so that only the rich will get it. People will get beef not in proportion to their need, but only in proportion to their purchasing power. If we keep the price down, everyone will get his fair share.
Literal Marxism.
Yep.
Egalitarianism.
No, just straight up Marxism, not even, mask off.
Yeah, no, it's, yeah, I actually, in my notes, I had to write down just who these people are and just call them out as egalitarians.
Right. That's completely ignoring that the higher prices lead to a higher profit and an investment in production, so that prices will eventually be lowered.
And they'll be able to keep supplying, of course.
Right.
Because if there's an increase in demand, there's going to be an increase in the need to replace those products. And they need that money to do so.
Mm-hmm. And
well,
not
only
invest in labor-saving devices as well.
Yeah, basically they'll figure out ways of increasing production.
Yep.
Yep. And the first thing to be noticed about this argument is that if it is valid, the policy adopted is inconsistent and timorous, which means pretty much based on fear. For if purchasing power rather than need determines the distribution of beef at a market price of $2.52 a pound, it would also determine it, though perhaps to a slightly less smaller degree, at say a legal ceiling price of 150 cents a pound. The purchasing power rather than the need argument in fact holds as long as we charge anything for beef at all. It would cease to apply only if the beef were given away for free.
Yep. And Mario actually brings up something. Competition driving prices up. Good joke, socialists.
Pretty much.
Like if you need to be turning a profit, you need to people need to be buying it at whatever price it is naturally, so that you can, like we said, invest. So we can invest in labor saving devices and higher production, so that the price can be lowered. You're literally like creating higher scarcity and shortages by trying to like stop these natural prices.
Another good point, which I think is, somewhat of a legitimate concern, is just, a small group of people or like one person buying a lot more than they need for whatever reason. And we saw a lot of discussion about this during the pandemic, especially in the earlier days, like 1-2 months ago. And what we saw was, thankfully, we didn't have, at least as far as I'm concerned, we didn't have much emergency legislation passed to stop that. But what we did see was, retailers deliberately and voluntarily taking action to limit how much can be sold to an individual person or an individual group, in order to make sure everyone gets it. So you don't need the government to do that. People, like the stores, if they can afford it, they're doing that deliberately.
Well,
Right. At my store, where I work, alcohol, you're only allowed to get 2 bottles of alcohol, whether it's the 16 ounce
you
or the
broke up
32
there.
ounce. Oh, I'm sorry. At my store where I work, for alcohol, there's other products too, but for alcohol, you're only allowed to get only 2 per specific item, whether it's the 16 ounce or the 32 ounce, because it's flying off the shelves every day. Like I will probably stock like 30 boxes of alcohol, and then I'll come in the next day at like 2 o'clock, and it'll all be gone, save for maybe like 1 bottle. And then by the time I'm like out there stocking more freight, that one's already gone itself too. So, that's just what we're having to do to keep people from buying it all. And
Yeah,
I'm not sure what we're doing with toilet paper, but it's flying off the shelves still too.
Yeah, no. In America, I don't know what it's like in Brazil, but in America, whenever an emergency is declared, prices are actually fixed for a lot of essential, quote unquote, essential items like toilet paper, water, basic food, and so on and so forth. And so, companies actually need to implement, like, you can only buy 2 of this policies, because of such price fixing measures, because they can't just say, oh, we're going to double the price of this, or so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that doesn't happen here like automatically, but the governors and the president, they can issue those kinds of things. Fixed price of that, fix the price of this. They don't do it often, but they can do it. They have the power to. What happened here was actually you had products that were prohibited from being sold, like, or at least very restricted, like 70% alcohol and stuff like that for whatever reason, I don't know, but it had like restricted sales, and then because of the pandemic they basically dropped the restrictions so it could be sold to regular people, like on the shelves. Which is a good thing, but it's gonna go away probably.
Yeah, for some reason at my store, we're only getting in the 70% alcohol anymore. I don't know what's happened to like the 50% or the 91%. Like it's just not showing up at all anymore.
I don't think it's as cost effective as the other one.
Yeah,
that's my
it's kind
guess.
of like I think the 70% is like right in that middle. Obviously, it's right in that middle area between 50 and 91, so it's still more effective than not, which is why we're only ordering that specific 70%.
Yeah. But that's also something that, only the consumers and by extent the companies can determine. So again, it's just pointless to try to decide legally what products can and should or shouldn't be regulated.
Mm-hmm. What we also saw over this over the pandemic and the whole price fixing thing is people reporting others for like buying in bulk and then selling high for price gouging, basically, which is a nonsense term. But there have been I've seen many people like trying to like dog on other people for having like for buying in bulk certain products that were like hand sanitizer. There was a guy in some city that had tons of hand sanitizer and was selling it for a fairly high price for what hand sanitizer would normally cost, and people were reporting him to whatever bureaus, the police, and having him trying to get him arrested and everything. And his supply was confiscated.
Yep. That's because of the price fixing measures and so on and so forth.
Yep.
People
It
have
was very sorry.
Yeah, people have basically been fed this thing about price gouging and so on and so forth. And to a certain extent, it is true that entrepreneurs can price their goods too high. But how you rectify that is by not buying it, and eventually they'll have to reduce the price.
Right. It's literally if they buy too much and then try to sell too, it's literally their loss. Like they're only hurting themselves by not speculating correctly.
Yep. Anyways, I think it's time to keep moving.
Yeah. So schemes for maximum price fixing usually begin as efforts to keep the cost of living from rising. The sponsors of these price controls assume there's something normal about these prices, and that anything above them is unreasonable, regardless to changes in production or demand. Bringing a commodity below its natural price has two consequences. The first is to increase demand. Because it is cheaper, people will be encouraged to buy more of it because they can afford to. But the second consequence is to reduce the supply of it. Because people buy more of it at a cheaper cost, production is discouraged, profit margins are reduced or wiped out, and the marginal producer is driven out of business. An example is in World War II, slaughterhouses were required by the Office of Price Administration to slaughter and process meat for less than the cost to them than cattle on the hoof and the labor of slaughter and processing. Setting a maximum price leads to the exact opposite of what government regulators originally intended. Limiting the wages and profits of those who make the necessary commodities without doing so to those who produce luxuries and semi-luxuries discourages production of necessities and stimulates production of less essential goods. Somebody
because
had made a comment.
Yeah, the guy Mario said a guy selling stuff that people are voluntarily buying, the fiend.
The
What a
thing
terrible
about
person.
what Emo said is that if you put up price ceilings, as they like to call it, people are going to start producing other goods because they're going to have a higher margin of profit with those other goods. So it's just you're removing the incentive for the essential goods to be produced.
and that's part of why we live in such a hedonistic consumerist culture rather than one that encourages like saving for the future and planning ahead.
Yeah, again, you're
And
encouraging consumption and not production, and that's the problem.
yeah, uh, that that
Yeah.
uh, that really stuck out to me when I was reading this because I see that as a serious problem. Like a lot of people are like not able to buy food or other things because the prices are just artificially altered, while things that aren't as important are getting cheaper. Um,
Yep. I don't know if you've seen the big Caterpillar harvesting machines that are completely automated now, but so much of farming has become automated that farmers are doing way less of the actual like planting of seeds and driving of machinery and such, and they're more basically becoming technicians to get all of these automated machines working.
I
And you would think
wasn't
that
aware
all of
of
these
that.
labor-saving devices, would bring costs down, but it seems like food prices have basically stayed steady, at least since I've been alive. Maybe some it's increased a little bit to keep up with inflation, but I think it's basically been the same.
Mm. I wouldn't know, but I have noticed like you go into like certain fast food restaurants and you'll see like stuff like salads are like way more expensive than some burger that's really not good for you, made with all these preservatives and just not good stuff that's just not good for you.
Yep.
And I've seen people complain about that for a long time. And then when you read about stuff like this, it's kind of like, oh, so that's kind of why.
Yep.
Um, let's see. Guess I'll move on then. That's if any, unless anybody has anything to add to that.
Nope.
Nope.
All right. Um. So when the consequences of price fixing becomes apparent to the regulators, uh, becomes apparent, the regulators adopt various other policies in an attempt to avert them, such as rationing, cost control, subsidies, and universal price fixing. With rationing, the government adopts a dual currency system. An example: a set number of coupons as well as money are distributed in order to limit demand on goods. However, this only does half the job a free market would do with the price system. Rationing only limits supply without demand without stimulating supply, as higher prices would do. The government may try to assure supply by extending its control over the costs of production. This results in the very things the government tried to stop being extended to other areas of production.
Yep.
Anything to say about that?
Yeah.
really.
Yeah. Other than to repeat what you just said, it extends to other areas of production. That's a big factor, and why it's so insidious.
Right, because like you're not like when these policies are put into place, they're not understanding that all of these things have costs to them. Um, Labor has costs. Uh, you know, uh, the uh, the materials needed to produce goods have costs. Like none of the things that you need to even like come up with, say a factory or something, you still have to purchase those. Um, all of these things just have costs, and just placing them on necessities just logically means you're going to have to put this on other things as the prices of things are distorted. I just lost my spot again. Okay. In a further attempt to avert this crisis, the government may grant subsidies to producers in order to offset the losses, but it is more so the consumer who is subsidized by the lower cost for goods than the producer. It should be stated that these subsidies are also being paid for by tax dollars. So while the price fixing is going on, and all these measures are put into place to help save the producers, the government is also taking more money away from the consumer itself to keep these businesses in place, so while also trying to keep prices low. So as we get further into the weeds of all this meddling in the economy, you're going to see that it's becoming more and more totalitarian.
And more expensive.
Yeah. Price fixing can be seen as successful for a short period of time, especially in wartime, but the longer it is in effect, demand becomes chronically increased in excess of supply. The excess purchasing power artificially turns towards non-rationed goods, and thus pressure is applied to ration these other goods as they become scarce as well. The logical end result is a completely regimented economy. Wages would be held down as rigidly as prices. Labor would be rationed as ruthlessly as raw materials. The state would become totalitarian and petrify the economy and dictate everything. Black markets would arise historically have arisen within totalitarian economies, which eventually replace the market itself. However, there is damage done beyond the price-fixing rationing in the process, as formerly efficient firms are replaced with the lower-quality black market firms.
Yeah, a cool thing that I think is worth mentioning here is I'm not entirely sure about this because I've only heard it. I haven't read it anywhere, so I didn't really have a way to verify it. So if anyone knows better about this, feel free to speak up, but I have been told that because of what you just said, that the same logic that you just explained, in the later years of the Soviet Union, over 50% of the economy was private, even though it was supposed to be, 100% nationalized or 100% public. But over 50% was private, specifically because of black markets or other, irregular businesses. So it's just, the extreme example.
Yeah, and agorists try to say that that black markets would just will like cause the state to fall, but it doesn't. It can help, but I don't believe like it is a primarily what you should be doing in order to try and cause the state to be abolished. I have to switch out my headphones real quick because they're about to die, so give me 1 second.
Alright.
Okay. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
It's almost as if it's kind of like the slacktivism type of libertarianism, where it's like, oh yeah, I have a weed plant growing in my backyard, I'm totally bringing down the state type of deal. It's like it's the easiest way to say that you're doing something to destroy the state,
without actually doing anything.
Yeah, and without like having to go out and organize people, to raise that class consciousness that Hopper talks about, between the taxpayers and the ruling elite. And so, black markets have been used to subvert regulations and such. However, they don't have a great track record of creating a libertarian social order. For instance, after World War II, this is actually gone over in the book, black markets of various price-fixed goods became bigger than the white markets, and many firms that used to be in the white market started just ignoring regulations and price fixing without telling anyone. However, it's not like France, Germany, the United Kingdom, Italy. It's not like these countries just fell apart and now Europe is a libertarian wonderland. They basically just reformed the regulations and price fixing. So yes, it did lead to less regulation overall, but it's not like it just completely destroyed the state either.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I can't find my earbuds, so I guess I'm just gonna have to talk into my phone.
Okay.
But you can hear me fine, right?
Yep, I can hear you fine.
All right, cool.
Did you catch what I said?
Yeah, I heard you. And for the last little bit, it mostly just goes into it just like further elaborates on that. People, it says people will for other businesses and other things, people like clamor for these regulations and everything because people don't want to pay higher prices for goods and services. They want cheap stuff, so they will lobby and they will support politicians in order for these regulations to go into effect. But people don't apply this to when they make their own goods. They think that theirs are special and that they nobody else understands, the reasons for why they have their prices at what they do.
Yeah, it's basically arrogance, really.
Yep.
Another big thing is that everyone seems to think that with these subsidizations, they're going to get the better end of the stick, whether they are the consumer or the producer or the wage laborer. And that actually brings us into the next chapter, chapter 18, minimum wage laws. Minimum wage laws are just like any other minimum price law and should be treated as such. And so a lot of the same arguments from the from the previous chapter is actually kind of applied to this chapter. So if you guys don't have anything else to add, we can just go into chapter 18.
Yeah, I'm fine with going into 18. I don't have anything else to add.
Me neither.
Yeah. So the first thing that is certain is that no one worth under the minimum wage will be employed. For a low wage and the meager benefits that the worker is able to provide the community, you substitute unemployment. And this is one of the main arguments you hear usually conservatives in America say why we shouldn't raise the minimum wage, but I don't think they realize that this is an argument against having a minimum wage at all. And I think more like the politicians obviously aren't going to say that for reasons, but I think more of the lay people actually understand that the minimum wage just hurts everyone. I know that my family, the conservative side of my family, actually understands that minimum wages should probably be abolished.
Yeah, from my personal experience, and we live in different countries, so different realities, but over here it's quite the opposite actually. We had last year, sorry, not last year, we're in 2020, 2018, when we are having the elections. Bolsonaro's vice president, which is a military general, he brought up the idea of ending the 13th salary. And that's actually something that I have to explain to you what it is, because it's something so absurdly weird and particular to our country that most people from other countries don't know it exists or what it is. So basically here we have essentially companies are forced to pay 12 salaries to their employees every month, so one salary for January, February, etc. So 12 salaries for 12 months. And then we have this thing called the 13th salary, which is at the end of the year, you basically get one extra salary, which is the same amount as your regular salary. And it's such a dumb concept, not to use a worse word. And essentially, of course, what happens is, you end up having lower salaries overall. So, if you had only 12 salaries, they would be higher in value. The total would be about the same. And he suggested abolishing that because, he said, this is a dumb idea. There's like, 2 countries in the world that have this thing. It's just dumb. And then everyone got really mad at him because it's like he said, it's like he was proposing, mass murder. Like, the reaction was just absurd. And it's such a dumb concept that you would think that it's not a big deal. But, sometimes people are just so used to, welfare and to how the government does things for them that it's really hard to break that mentality.
Yep,
Yeah.
it's we have the same kind of dependence mentality that in America, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
It's
Doesn't Bolsonaro have Mises Institute advisors?
I believe he does, at least, maybe not advisors, but I know he has read material from the Mises Institute, and he has befriended or at least been involved with people from it. But first of all, the Mises Institute here in Brazil is a bit it's a little bit like the Cato Institute in the US. Maybe not as bad, I'm not entirely sure, but it did get a little bit distorted, I guess, in some ways. But basically, like, he has been really sloppy with the economics, and the people that he appointed that were supposed to be very pro-free market, they just ended up not doing much at all. It's just been really disappointing government when it comes to economics. It's like, it's not like he didn't make things worse, at least not considerably worse, like the other candidate, which was all but a literal communist, would have done. I mean, the economy got worse because of other things, but in terms of actual policies that he didn't do much that would make the economy a lot worse. But he didn't do basically anything to fix it, so
Yep, that's sounds like the best you can expect out of a Republican.
Yeah.
Right here in the U.S.
Republicans here are going full leftist at this point.
Well, yeah. it's been a slow march, essentially. As Malice always points out, conservatism is progressivism's driving the speed limit, and that's because they've lost the moral argument. Actually, they pretty much seeded the moral argument in the 20s and 30s, and Rothbard even called them out on that in egalitarianism as a egalitarianism as a revolt against nature.
Speaking of Malice, after this, I'm gonna. He's streaming with Mencius Molebug, and I'm gonna check that out as soon as we're done.
Oh, that's neat. I might check it out as well.
Yep, it's live right now. Don't leave us though.
Yeah, you can just wait. Then you go check them out. But yeah, just not to get much into party politics, you guys know I'm a bit stuck up on this issue, but to me both parties are just controlled by the same people. They just choose whichever one's more convenient at the time, which right now happens to be the Republicans. I was talking about this. I was talking about this earlier yesterday, but I have made this point on Twitter several times, which is just I think Joe Biden was specifically chosen because he's going to lose. Like, they deliberately chose the worst candidate that they could because they want the Democrats to lose. Because while Trump is in power, they know Trump is not going to do anything to actually change things. So they can just have him in power and constantly blame conservatives for the bad things.
Yep. I agree.
Party politics is just completely paused. There's no point.
Yeah, there's no point.
It's a theater show.
Why I don't associate with the LP in America.
Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't think the LP is necessarily controlled, but it's still really cringe, to say the least.
No, Sarwark is CIA.
Yep.
Oh, never mind.
Yeah. Actually, we're gonna have a article on Sarwark fairly soon, so keep a lookout for that. It should be coming out on Wednesday morning.
Ooh, I'm excited. I gotta catch up on a couple of articles too. I've been working a lot.
Yeah, I've been really busy too. I need to catch up.
As one of the editors, I get to read them before all of you.
Yep.
I envy you.
Yep.
All right, so you want to move on?
Yeah. So wage increases by law cannot easily be passed on to consumers through raising prices of goods. The reason for that is consumers can either buy an imported product or buy some substitute product. Like, if you raise the price of beef, they can buy pork.
Yep.
Not only this, but higher prices will cause them to buy less of it. Just basic supply and demand. So it may seek comfort to the egalitarians. If the X industry cannot survive without paying adequate wages, then it should go under. This ignores that this deprives consumers of that product. It also ignores the workers of that industry that will become unemployed, and the wages of the X industry were the best those workers could get, and thus those workers, if they do not want to be unemployed, will have to find some alternative work that is not as appealing, or it just doesn't just not as appealing. Either it's more dangerous, so it doesn't pay as well,
or they won't find work.
Yep.
There's also that risk.
Yep. Minimum wage laws increase unemployment, and people who become unemployed are not only idle, but on unemployment. But what I mean by idle is that instead of working and providing something to the community, they are doing nothing to of any worth to anyone but themselves.
Yep.
So unemployment, if raised to the level of the minimum wage, will make people making the minimum wage stop working because they can make the same amount of money being idle as they can be working to their, the fullest of their abilities. And relief itself makes people see their wages as what they can make over relief instead of what they actually make. So, for instance, if I can make $400 a week working, but relief is at $320, I actually see myself working a full week for $80 instead of the full $400 I would normally be working for.
Yeah.
Hmm.
It just makes work less, worth less overall.
Yep.
Or at least makes it feel like it's worth less.
And the negative income tax is an idea by Milton Friedman to subsidize workers, and this is just one strategy of many to subsidize workers, but it's just a disguised dole. You're just putting more and more people on the dole instead of less people, essentially. It's also why Mises basically called the Chicago Boys and many other people at Mount Pelerin a bunch of socialists. Because they were coming up with all these different ways. Hayek was there too. He also called Hayek a socialist. But they were just coming up with many different ways to try to equalize wealth and equalize income, essentially. And so, yeah, that's basically socialism.
Yeah, I found it a little bit disrespectful that when during the little interview they had on when Mises did that, they were just laughing about it.
Who was doing the interview?
I believe it was Friedman saying that when Mises shouted that at them and stormed out the door, Friedman was just like Mises was so stuck in his ways and absolutist about it, and he just laughed about it.
Yeah,
I personally find that disrespectful, considering how great Mises was.
Yeah, and it's somewhat telling that Mises was the one out of all of them that had a solid basis for his morality, essentially.
Yeah.
And for economics as well. It really does show the value of praxeology and such.
Yeah. I don't understand how Hayek went down the road he did, being a student of Mises and one of if I'm remembering correctly, one of his favorites for a long time, even though like his major contribution was like the use of knowledge in society.
Actually, it's the use of knowledge in society that brought him down that path. He went from looking at actions to looking at ideas and wills, and that really just muddies the analysis of society. Because instead of looking at practical and real texts, you're looking at ideas and wills, which I don't want to say is meaningless, but it becomes very meaningless very fast because you're abstract. You're not even abstracting. You're getting away from the real world and going into the realm of basically intangibles.
Okay.
And also because good intentions don't mean good decisions.
Yeah.
As the phrase goes, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yep.
Somebody left a comment. Milton Friedman's talks are way better than his actual proposals.
Yeah, so Milton Friedman, this is actually something true that you'll find with many people when they talk about economics. They're able to find problems. Like even Bernie Sanders, he can find issues with the current system, but he just can't create proposals. And same is true with Milton Friedman. Milton Friedman and Thomas Sowell are very, very good at detailing what's wrong with the current proposals, but they're very bad at proposing solutions. One of the reasons is because the Chicago School is entirely based on economic history, what Austrians would call economic history. But so basically, you're in the realm of statistics, and Hans Hermann Hoppe in the book Economic Science and the Austrian Method basically points out that just because you have numbers in front of you doesn't mean that you're able to understand what those numbers mean, and it doesn't mean that you're going to be able to understand what a new economic proposal is going to do with the economy. And that's why you need the Austrian method, is because it's based on rationalism. So you don't need economic data. It's actually a precursor to those economic data that allows you to reason out, like you do in mathematics, how something happens. And you know, many people that are on the right but don't subscribe to the Austrian School of Economics will say, what is the reason we should say that 1 + 1 = 2? Well, there's a priori reason for saying that, and there's not an a priori reason for saying 1 + 1 = 3. And so it's just how economics and mathematics works, that it works better when you're constructing logical arguments using a priori knowledge instead of trying to figure out data and then moving backwards to theory. There's many reasons for this. One, humans are actors of their own with their own free will, and thus they're not like a hammer that you can just figure out how it works. The other reason is that there's almost no way that you're going to figure out all of the data that you actually need to do to run an experiment, so on and so forth. There's a bunch of different reasons why economics has to work like mathematics and not like chemistry. And even chemistry, there are scientific papers that go over the rational basis for hard sciences like physics and chemistry. But it's so but those arguments are so basic and so short that it's often overlooked when they're teaching you science, just because it's kind of intuitive. Like one of the things is that you have something called temporal causality, that events in the past is responsible for what's happening right now. And the reason why it's called temporal is because it's based on the speed of light. And so if it was something 5 seconds ago is causing something that's happening right now, well, it has to be at least it has to be under 5 light seconds away. But anyways, this is getting really off topic and really theoretical.
Yeah, that got way into beyond me real quick.
Yeah. But that's kind of more where my training comes from, is the hard sciences, so I kind of know a little bit more about that, and I'm just learning the I'm just learning economics over the past couple of years instead of, almost the last decade. I've been trained in science, the hard sciences.
Mm-hmm.
I should probably say the physical sciences. Economics and mathematics. They're more the rational sciences.
Yeah.
So, moving on.
Wait, I'm sorry. What chapter are we on now? I lost.
We're on we're about to end chapter 18, minimum wage laws.
Okay, I'm sorry. I got lost. My train of thought here.
I think you left off. I see you highlighting it, but I think you left off. I don't know if you can see my highlight, but right here.
Right. So I already talked about people who become unemployed, unemployment benefits. Actually, what we left off talking about is the people being on the dole, and the negative income tax, and Mises and Mount Pelion society, and him calling them a bunch of socialists, and why what is the theoretical underpinnings of why Hayek turned so bad, and why the Chicago school left a lot to be desired.
Okay, then. So are we
So
done with 18 then, or do you have anything, or do you got anything to finish up with?
So this is actually an appeal to emotion that's seen very, very much in politics, and it's that they will question, like if you question minimum wage laws, they will question if you wish to see everybody as well off as possible. But any decent person wants that. What's actually under discussion when people bring up the minimum wage laws and its abolishment is actually what is the proper means to achieve such ends. We cannot distribute more wealth than is created. Thus, the best way to increase wages is to increase labor productivity and not just set arbitrary prices for things.
Actually, can I just make a point here? You said that, everybody just wishes everyone to be as well as possible. I wish everyone to be as well as they are willing and deserving of. And that's one of the things about being a libertarian.
Right. I don't think really any decent person would say that you should just everyone there should be a post-scarcity society, and everyone should just have everything that they want without having to work for it. It's just that, yeah, it's just that that's what most people mean by they wish everyone was as well off as possible.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's just that, usually socialists don't mean it that way. They just mean it, we can take everyone and make everyone live like a king.
Yep. Meanwhile, only in an Ancapistan can we do that.
Unironically.
Yep. So, chapter 19 is also about wages, and it's about the union question. Do unions really increase wages? In a later edition of this book, chapter 19 is actually about rent control. I don't have that edition of the book, and I think the rent control arguments are. You can find them online. I believe Walter Block has a really good article on them, but they can, it can be summarized as such that rent control is the second best way of destroying a city, and only being beaten out by bombing that city.
And like I said earlier, depending on the size of the city, it may be the best one.
Yep.
Just because
So
of
I
how
think-
difficult it would be to bomb a really big city.
Yep. So, anyways, I think that's all that really needs to be said about rent control. And everywhere that it's been implemented has seen the supply contracted and the obvious implications of supply being contracted. So wages are determined basically by labor productivity. Wages in the U.S. will fall greater than in Germany and England, where the labor movement was far more advanced. And so it can't be that the labor movement just increases wages. Just that's kind of what in science that we would call a sanity check. It's not necessarily this reasoning that I was talking about in economics, but it would be theory and practice have to coincide. And so if your theory says that, oh, we should have a utopia if we get rid of the church, get rid of business, and get rid of the state, then that society collapses when you try to do that. It's a good sanity check. It's a good check to say that that's theory, whatever it may be, is probably not a good theory.
Yeah.
So, employers, and they are trying to get workers to work for them and not their competitor, actually tend to bid up workers to their full economic worth, because employers don't want to see a worker that could make them a profit go to someone else and make them a profit. And so they will tend to, so wages naturally move towards the marginal revenue product of labor. And what the marginal revenue product of labor is, on the margin, another employee will get you so much revenue just because of his labor. And so as it approaches that, you get less and less profit off of the worker, but the wage of that worker increases to almost match the revenue that he brings into the business through his labor. Emo, this is another case of margin, another use of margin. So it can either mean what I said earlier as a percentage, but it can also mean making a decision on the margin. For instance, if I was going to pay you $14.95 an hour for labor, but I only made $15 an hour, I'd have that 5 cents of profit, and therefore I would hire you.
Okay.
And that's what it means to make decisions on the margin. Is this marginally a better state of affairs for me, or a marginally worse set of affairs for me? Or do I break even?
Okay. That makes sense.
That level of thinking was actually called the marginalist revolution of the 1860s.
Mm-hmm. I've heard of it. I just didn't ever look into it.
Yeah. So
I know that's what Menger's about. Oh,
Yep.
We were just about to say that too.
Yep. Well, Mango was one of 3 people that created it. There was 2 people from the classical school, and then the third person, Mango, from the Austrian school. And this is actually the arguments that Mango made is what kind of separated the Austrian school from mainline economics at the time. Classical economics is what you'd call it back then.
Okay.
Anyways, I'm not
Do we
gonna.
have plans to get into any Menger stuff? I forget what the list has.
We definitely could. I I don't know if you'd want to go into principles of economics, but that's a fairly dry book. Like, it's just definitions and the obvious implications of, like, here's the definition of a commodity. What does this mean for, like, the rest of the economy? Type thing. Like, it is very, very dry.
I feel like for me, that would be helpful. For me, at least. I might do it on my own if we don't want to go through that on the podcast. But if
Yeah.
y'all decide that y'all want to, that could help a lot of people too.
Yeah.
If we want to deal with the dryness.
Yeah. It's just very, very technical. Meanwhile, this is a really good introduction book. There's also other books that Mango has made that aren't quite as technical. So.
Okay.
So, Hazlitt starts off by saying that a union can make sure that there is a standard amount of pay for workers, and to reduce the problem of a lack of knowledge can have for an individual worker. So an individual worker might not know exactly how much a blacksmith makes, or someone who basically is a modern day blacksmith, with obvious automated machines and so on and so forth. And the union can help standardize this, but the process I described earlier of employers tending to bid workers up to their full economic worth is precisely what kind of alleviates this. Not only because workers tend to kind of know what their peers are making, because these people aren't individuals in a vacuum. They will have some knowledge of wages, but also employers will sometimes even tell you some statistics if they think it helps their case, and so on and so forth. So I really think that this is giving unions way too much credit, because industry statistics would likely be cheaper to buy than standing union fees, because union fees are taken out of every single paycheck. Meanwhile, you only need to buy wage statistics every couple years, essentially, to try to stay current, with market shifts and whatnot. So I guess the union could provide that service, but I think if we know the history of unions, that is a very naive way of thinking about unions. However, he basically goes into one-sided labor legislation that has helped unions fix wages above the workers' market worth, or implemented restrictions on some basis other than proved skill. And this is actually somewhat true. Many people that we would consider lawbulants often bring up the fact that the market doesn't discriminate. And while this is largely true, one notable example is when the government subsidizes something that actually allows them to discriminate based on nonsense reasons. That aren't based on market demand, but it was just like, oh, I don't want to hire this particular race, and since I'm being subsidized, I can afford to hire only any other race but that. So on and so forth. So that's actually something true. I wouldn't have probably brought it up if I was writing the chapter, But it's a totally fair criticism to make. So the most obvious example of unions enforcing their will on employers is that of a strike. It is possible, like theoretically possible, for strikes to be peaceful, but history has shown that such disputes rarely are. German anarchists that came over in the late 19th and early 20th century would often rile up such strikes with unionist propaganda to have an excuse to cause chaotic violence and to bomb manufacturing plants. The reason why they would do such things is because they were anarcho-communists. Because that's what anarchists basically used to mean when you were talking about anarchists. And thankfully, private security in the form of the Pinkertons were allowed back then. The state has basically cracked down on such private security companies and their use of force to keep property safe. Picketing is. Go ahead.
Actually, I had a friend that was trying to argue with me and saying that the Pinkertons, that it's better to have public police because the Pinkertons would just bust your ass for complaining about stuff. And I was just like, I don't know how true that is. I don't know anything about the Pinkertons for real, but I just put down that as long as security is privately funded, there's no moral argument for the public police in the first place. So I don't really care what the Pinkertons did.
Well, the thing is that it's not like there wasn't police available. It's just the usual thing that when the riots happened, the police would be overwhelmed and the anarchists could bomb your factory just because the police were undermanned and under-equipped to deal with such things. Meanwhile, the private security would make sure they would have machine guns and so on and so forth to make sure that the property couldn't be destroyed. And it's not even that they use machine guns to just gun down a ton of people. Typically, they'd be outnumbered 10-1, and they'd almost have the same amount of casualties as the mob, but they'd basically just use force to make the mob go away from the plant, essentially.
Okay.
Because they were hired to protect the plant, so they were just going to make sure that the mob wasn't attacking the plant. So the reason why hired thugs in manufacturing plants can't really happen is because there is such a thing as public police, and it would be very, very easy to prove in court that, the Pinkertons that you hired to protect your plant were doing such and such, and that's basically what you hired them to do. And so if they were doing things like forcing people to work, basically instituting slavery or something, they could just go to the police, and it would be a very because it was such a regular business transaction, it would be very easy to prove in court. Meanwhile, with these mobs and these anarchists, they weren't on the open market saying, we're organizing a mob to run a strike and make sure that strike breakers, the workers that are strike breakers, can't go to work. They wouldn't openly say that. It wouldn't be a regular market transaction. It would be basically organized crime, and it would be a lot harder to prove. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. It really sucks that anarchists have their cool name, but they started off as communists.
Yep. Yeah. A way that the unions enforced their decrees for higher wages by using pickets against workers. These could be either old workers that don't see the need to strike, or new permanent workers to that the company is hiring at the old rates. And so this really shows that the strikers are acting from a position of privilege when there are people that are willing to work for the wage that they were offered, but they're going to try to keep them out until they pay the strikers the wage that they want instead of the wage that their skills can bring on the open market. And actually, strikebreakers is what he gets into next. He gets into basically hired thugs to, make the workers carry on or to scare workers to come back at the old rates. As I explained, that's not really feasible, and the history of this won't show that's what happened. Violence was usually used to break up the picketing to allow new workers to come in, or to protect the property of the plant owner. So another thing is the owners could pay higher rates for the new workers to essentially scare the old workers into accepting the old rates. But this also doesn't really make sense as a strategy, as if it is true that the higher rates would cause a loss, you'd have to be eating your savings in order to do this. And that's just not a winning strategy on the market. It's also or if it is true that a higher rate would just lead to less profit, it's kind of unlikely that the news of higher rate of the strike breakers wouldn't spread quickly. You would think that as people intermingle in society, one of the workers that you hired would probably let it known what he's getting, what his wages are. And it only requires that one guy having a loose lip to have the entire rumor spread around the community. So it just doesn't seem like that's a likely strategy.
Yeah, you only need to tell your family, and you know how moms will tell their friends how you're doing and everything.
Yep. I wasn't even necessarily thinking about family, but I was thinking about you go to a bar or a saloon back in those days, because you just got to a new location, you have a new good paying job, you might tell someone, "Oh, I got a great paying job. It's making $19 an hour." Something along those lines.
Right.
Even if you were told not to say anything, as soon it's unlikely that everyone would have a tight lip about exactly how much they make. It's just reality.
Yeah, they told me at my job not to tell people what I'm making, and I did it anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good idea for you not to tell, for just so that they no envy exists. But the thing is that you're gonna tell your friends, and it's unlikely that a completely segregated friend group. You're probably gonna have some mutual friends. So if someone was interested in figuring out how much you made, they could probably figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So emotional economics tells us that workers are being underpaid generally. To put this more clearly, market prices are chronically low. Another is that the interests of a nation's workers are aligned. This isn't the case as if enforce a wage above market wages, all other laborers are hurt. Such coercion in increasing wages is not based on economic productivity, but in political power and strategic position. Thus, national unions will be able to enforce higher wages, will not be able to enforce higher wages equally among all different wage workers. Prices will tend to increase to accommodate this increase in wages, but not all workers' wages are increased equally. So what really happens is that the less politically powerful jobs are subsidizing the more politically connected union labor. Even at its height, union labor only was about 25% of the U.S. workforce, and so it was the 75% that was subsidizing the 25%.
Makes sense.
There was another outcome of this increasing of wages, and that is unemployment. Let us assume that all workers could raise their wages by an equal amount through such coercive methods such as the Wagner Act. No one would be better off, as you would simply be trading in more dollars and not have the increased purchasing power of workers. I think that the case for unemployment is fairly obvious when we start mucking with prices in light of what we discussed in chapters 16 through 17. 16 through 18. It is conceivable, however unlikely, for businesses to simply have profits reduced without profits reduced without increasing the but what is another without increasing prices or becoming unprofitable. So you could have a case where a business basically just has its profit margin cut almost all the way without increasing the prices of its products or without businesses going under because they're unprofitable. So investors already have their capital trapped in businesses they have invested in, and they cannot easily get out of those businesses in terms of investment. So long as the businesses turn some profit, they will stay in the business. But there is the inevitable corollary to this, that since said business yields less returns, it will not be invested in. In the short term, they might replace broken items to maintain some yield on their investment, but in the long run, they will not replace items as they fall into obsolescence or decay. They may even invest abroad or not invest at all in cases where investment is just not profitable anymore. For instance, the reason why they might invest abroad is if you basically unionized the entire economy and made every single business in your nation unprofitable to invest in. And if the world unionized its labor, or you basically made investment in foreign capital illegal, they might just save the money themselves. So this lack of investment will make everyone poor. Labor may get a larger slice of the pie, but it will be a smaller pie. Hello?
I got disconnected. I missed what you said for like 10 seconds.
Yeah, so basically we're talking about why they might not invest in the economy, essentially.
Okay.
And as they stop replacing broken or obsolete items, it makes everyone poor, and thus labor might get a larger slice of the pie, but it will be a smaller pie. One of the main reasons that people really do believe that unions increase wages is post hoc ergo propter hoc, which means after this, therefore because of this. That's what the Latin means. So the growth of wages in the last half century, what he's talking about is from 1900 to 1950. So the growth of wages in the last half century, due mostly to capital investment and to technological and scientific advancement, must be due to growing unions, because unions grew between 1900 and 1950, and so did the wages, and therefore, and the fallacy, post hoc ergo propter hoc. After this, therefore, because of this. This is another reason why empirical economics fails so mightily, is because it really does get into this fallacy of how do you know that this caused the other thing without some theory that tells you it does.
Okay. Makes sense.
Another fallacy comes, another reason why people think this comes from another fallacy that we've discussed earlier. It looks at what a rise in wages in the workers that are still employed would mean in the short run. And so instead of looking at what happens to the workers, some of them becoming unemployed, what happens to the rest of the economy, they only look at the workers that would still be employed under the unionization scheme, where the unionized workers just get more money. Another fallacy is that there is a fixed amount of work. This ignores that work creates work. The work A does is the demand for the work that B. Not only do we need, not only is it that the economy provides for needs, but it also provides for wants. And the richer we are, the more and more wants that we want fulfilled will be fulfilled. And so it's not, the economy isn't just, having a roof over our heads, having food, and so on and so forth. It's always increasing the amounts of needs and wants. Let's see.
We're listening. We're just waiting for you to.
Shut up.
No, for you to finish, because that's a lot of information. So I just don't want to interrupt. But yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Well, actually, that's kind of the end of what I was getting at. I thought the best way to end this chapter is to list that are involved in thinking that unionization works.
Yeah.
So, unless you guys have something else to say, I think this is about the end.
I don't have anything to add to that. I think the fixed amount of work and work creates work. I think previous chapters have pretty much explained why that's true.
Yeah, and it's really odd that the same things keep on popping up. I could talk about why the work of A is the demand for the work B does, but we've already discussed that in the guy who makes tires, his supply of tires is the demand for products that other people make.
Yeah, as well as the guy who makes cars is the demand for the guy who makes tires, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. And, money tends to obstruct such realities, but really what's happening is the shoemaker sells shoes, which in turn he goes to the hat maker and buys a hat. And it's actually kind of a more abstract way of trading a shoe for a hat. Hello.
Oh, I heard,
Yeah, no,
I heard
no,
you. I
yeah,
thought
I
you were
heard
gonna
you.
say
Yeah.
anything.
Okay.
I just don't have
So
anything to add.
Yeah, so I didn't see my the green circle. So I thought I disconnected or something.
No, we heard you.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that though.
Yeah, this is actually the some of the more chapter 19 was some of the more editorializing that I've had to do. Well, I wanted to do. I didn't technically have to. Just because
We know
I-
you
I-
hate unions.
yeah, he went he went fairly soft on unions in some places, and I was like, I mean, if you're just going from a theoretical standpoint, sure, but we know the history of unions. You know, it's not like this new phenomena that you know, no one knows about.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we can look at how violent they have been, and the only reason why we don't have violent riots now is because they basically use the state to be the violent rioters in case labor disputes go against the union. You know, unfair labor practices, unfair labor negotiations.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how it is in Brazil, but like, it's illegal for a employer to say that if I increase wages to what you're demanding, then the business will be unprofitable.
I'm really not sure exactly how it is here. So basically, we have like, I guess, two different types of work here. Essentially, you have what we call registered work and unregistered work. So you have this basically like this document, which is like a little agenda, which is your work. What's it called? It's your like work document where it's registered where you work, everywhere you've worked in the past, etc. All the information is there. If the information goes there, you're registered, and then you are eligible for a bunch of government worker rights and privileges and whatnot. And that usually, as you'd expect, means a lower salary, but you get all the privileges. And then there's basically unregistered work, which is, okay, of course you're still operate under all the same laws and all the same requirements, but you don't have, the employer isn't forced to provide all of those services as the government dictates. And then you usually get a higher salary at the, you just don't get like extra money for transportation and whatnot, but you get a higher salary in exchange. What happens is, if you're unregistered, then you have a bit more leeway in terms of negotiating with the employer. But if you're registered, then it's like a really strict thing that depends a lot on very specific regulations, and they have so many regulations that I just don't know even how to begin to get into them. So you would really have to ask someone else if you want like specific information and whatever. But at least when it comes to unregistered work, and I am an unregistered worker, by the way. I have never worked for registered. I have the document, but it's just empty. I have never worked registered. It's just a lot easier. I don't even have a contract. I just go there and I work and they give me money and that's it.
Yeah, all of these regulations, because I switched states as I got out of college, basically. I grew up in one of the freest, the economic freest state, which is Florida. And I moved to a very economically repressive state, in terms of America.
Yeah.
And having all of these regulations at work is just mind-boggling, and just in various different things. There's many more cases where the police have to get involved in New Mexico than in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, in Florida, it's a complete choice if you want to do private arbitration or have the police get involved. In the state I'm in now, you have to have the police get involved.
Yeah.
And so it's just a very odd thing. Well, at least it's odd to me growing up in a place where, it's much more free than going to a place that isn't. But I think we've exhausted everything we can out of these shows, so...
Yeah, we've been on for almost 2 hours already, so I think it's a good time to end.
And, okay. We'll see you guys again next week. We're probably also going to do the same 35 chapters. I've looked ahead, and I think that includes going all the way to...
35 pages, not chapters.
Right, 35 pages.
I'm not doing human action in a week.
Yeah, I think that goes all the way to the end of chapter 22, so I think we're going to be doing chapters 20 to 22 next week. Just because these chapters are beginning a lot longer.
Okay.
And then, obviously, I think we'll be doing 23 and 24, chapters 23 and 24, the week after that. And that's actually the end of the book, so make sure to give us suggestions for what we should be doing next time.
Does anybody have questions in the chat or anything? Or are we trying to end it now?
We can stay on for a couple more minutes as we wait for questions. I think I'll be putting up a poll for the next couple days on Twitter. If you guys like the tangents that we went on this time, or if you'd rather us stick to the main topics more.
Yeah, because we did go a little bit longer on certain topics, yeah.
Yeah, we also talked about things that are not pertaining to the book. That's kind of what I'm driving at.
Yeah, not necessarily, but yeah.
Yeah.
We kind of started from the topics on the book and we kind of went somewhere else.
Yep. So I don't know if people enjoy that or if they'd rather just have us summarize the book.
Yeah.
And talk about strictly what's in the book.
All right.
Well, if nobody has anything, no questions or anything.
Yeah. So what we're going to be doing after this is going into the anti-capitalistic mentality. It's not a long book. It's actually shorter than this book, so I think we'll only spend 2 or 3 weeks on it. It's looking more like 3 based on the length of it, but it's going to be a really short book, and it's going to basically allow us to have allow any suggestions to basically filter on through.
Yeah. So while we wait to see if anyone says anything or has any questions, should we just, talk about the Twitter stuff?
It's time to chill.
Yeah, time to chill.
Time to chill.
So all of our ads can be seen in the image. I'm Colton. I'm at Hetsu very much.
I'm Kyle.
I'm emo. Oh, go ahead, Kyle.
Yeah, I was just going in the order, but that's fine. I'm
Yeah.
Kyle at UFFZ Kyle.
There was
Yep.
the silence, so I just decided to take it. But
Yeah.
I'm emo, and I'm at emo Hoppean 346.
Yeah, Colton, do you have anything to tell us about the website? New articles?
We do have a new article that's out today. I'm sorry I couldn't get it to you yesterday. We will be having an article on Solrock coming out soon, so stay tuned for that. I think I'll also be getting into my individualism versus collectivism article sometime in the next week, so that should be fun.
Yeah, I need to write something else for eventually. I haven't written at all this past like 2 weeks. I was working on that document thing that didn't go to Hoppean, but it's on my Twitter, and it was just like really tiring. So I'm just taking a little bit of a break, and I'm also really busy lately. But as soon as I have the time, I'll be writing something else as well.
I haven't published a follow-up to my article on strategy, but I've been working on it. I've just haven't done enough work to publish it. I'm kind of in the drafting phase of collecting everything I want to talk about, and then I'll, try to finalize writing it and then edit it to make sure it flows well. So I'm in stage 1 of 3, so.
Yep.
Well, all right.
Okay, so I guess it's time to say goodbye.
Yep.
We'll be back next week, same time.
Yep.
And thanks for tuning in. Alright, I just